lady. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone, to Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. And it is my pleasure right now to introduce a friend for a long time online and first time to meet face to face, Alexar. I hope I say this right. Pendashteh? Am I close? Excellent. He will curate the panel and facilitate the conversation. He himself is a technologist and social entrepreneur with a focus on distributed technologies and large-scale cooperation. Among his many accomplishments, he is also co-organizer of Blockchain for Social Impact in Melbourne, and I'm co-organizer of the one in Perth. So it is my pleasure to hand it over to Alexar. Take it away, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, JP. Hello, everyone. IRL people in Queensland, Scotty who waved at me, and I think just a few of us, more people may join soon. The pleasure is mine to have the opportunity to steer some conversation here. I joined from my other computer as well to comment and read comments. Sorry about the echo. I have been joining NENA events and really enjoying the conversations. So hopefully we can add value to this great community. Our lens today be coming from the technology side, and we hope that we can bridge some gap from a very fast-paced technology train and the amazing body of work that the NENA community has been doing and is doing actively, and so that collectively we can get the best out of both worlds. So today, I don't know what everyone gets to see here on the panel. So we have a great panel with us today. I want to introduce, we have Akasha. Akasha, if you want to say hello, so you can appear on the screen in Queensland as well.
Hey, everyone.
Maybe tell everyone where you are based right now as well, so as we go through the panel.
Okay, do we introduce ourselves now, Alexa? Or...
You're welcome to, yeah, if you like to, yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, hey everyone. So my name's Akasha, and I've been in the blockchain space probably about 4 or 5 years, mostly in marketing. And the beauty about that is that
I'll go back and finish
I have to be able to understand blockchain technology and the associated technologies in a way that I can communicate that with the average person. And before that, I'm obviously in this because I love it. But before that, I had a sort of a long love affair with, human rights law and community advocacy groups. So I moved into blockchain as a solution for some of the problems that I saw in the world that had been brought about by centralization of power and commodification of everything beautiful about our world.
Thank you so much, Akasha. I met Akasha, I was introduced to Akasha as Miss Blockchain. So, she doesn't say that, but like to bring it up. And great insight. So we will get to some of the projects throughout the panel where Akasha is actually using blockchain in those projects. Very interesting. Thank you, Akasha. Moving on to David Bovill, who's joining us from a long way. David, do you want to say hello? And I'm happy to introduce you, or feel free to introduce yourself, whatever suits better.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, I'm calling in from London. I guess I might as well introduce myself. My interest in is long-standing in how communities and groups of people, ranging from artists to activists to startups, come together, deliberate and make decisions over real value that leads to action. So I work with a blockchain language called Lexon, which is a language for DAOs or legal DAOs. So it's a legal constrained language which compiles down to Solidity and other blockchain languages that allows communities to create their own organizational entities.
Beautiful. I think by the accent, it became clear where that far distance is. Are you actually based in London, David?
Based, yes, I'm currently in London, thanks to the lockdown. I wish I was with you lot in Australia, given the weather here right now. But yes, I'm based in London.
Beautiful, thank you. Yet another thing to have in common with UK, the lockdowns. Thank you. So moving on to Anouk.
If I unmute myself, it helps. Hi, Alexar. My name is Anouk Pinchetti. I'm here in Melbourne on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation. And my road in here was I've been in the blockchain space for about 5 years, but I guess my prior love affair was currency since the early 90s, community and complementary currencies. And I got there by asking from, I guess, when I was about 7 or 8, why doesn't everybody just do what is in everybody's best interests? That's a question I'm still trying to answer, quite frankly. And that's what's brought me here.
Thank you, Anouk. And where are you based for the interest of audience?
In Melbourne here in Australia, on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation.
Beautiful, thank you. So I know the members of panel quite well, and I want to tell you that, like many members of this community, there were many different hats. I'm trying to kind of put them in one of those hats. I hope they don't mind. Maybe to allow us to kind of coordinate this conversation. Akasha, I want to put you in the with having had legal background. I want you to bring up more of your familiarity with land and biodiversity today. And David Bovill is a software developer, and I think we get to that point. David's using software for at the forefront of transforming law and legal. Yeah, I think I'll leave it to David. So that would be David, your angle, and Anouk. You've been involved with many blockchain projects, and as a currency designer, really good to have you. Maybe we can start from there. I'm gonna open up and pass it on to you, Anouk. So your involvement with blockchain project, you know, there's a lot of conversations about tokens and incentives and things like that. And I believe that has been one of the reasons that blockchain projects got a bad rep, I would say, amongst people who've been talking about things and doing community work for a long time, especially in this community that alternative currencies is not a new concept, as looks like many people have just discovered it. Many think they have invented it. I think that gave a very bad impression to many people for good reasons. Even my observation, I'm in tech, information architect and a software developer, and I was seeing how very quickly those who the more someone was competent in tech, the more they would distance themselves from blockchain projects from very early on. That, for the most part, I don't want to speak for everyone, from the early on. So the today attempt is to bring up a different picture from not just blockchains, specifically for DAOs, which we're going to get into, because this flavor of application of blockchain is very, very well aligned with what this community is mostly about, which are cooperatives and commons. And there is a deep understanding in this community. Normally, when we talk about DAOs in other settings, we have to explain all these concepts. We're not going to do that here. What we're trying to do is to clarify how blockchain technology is aligned with DAOs and is basically, sorry, with commons and cooperatives.
It's 1745.
And my computer announced time. I don't know if that went through the microphone. It just is that it did. Okay, so it's going to happen every 15 minutes. Sorry about that. And also the some development in legislation that has happened that's going to change everything. And as we all know, things are happening just too fast for everybody. So I think this is a very crucial time. Last year would have been too early. Next year would be too late to talk about this and I'm getting the note from the panelists that agree with me. So Anouk, having come from the world of tokenization and incentives and all that, which is not really compatible with the spirit of discussions that happen in NENA, can you tell us about DAOs? Explain to those who maybe are hearing this for the first time or been hearing about it, but they were curious. They don't know what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So DAO stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. And the idea really is that you can have contracts, pieces of code sitting on a blockchain that allow tens, hundreds, thousands, millions of people around the world to actually use a particular process and procedure electronically, usually through voting, to decide on all sorts of things, right? To govern an organization together. And really it's a form of extra legal organization. For the most part, David will talk to us about how it can also be a legal type of organization. But with blockchains being global in nature and having no sense of location in a way, these organizations are really effective in organizing groups of people that can be anywhere around the globe, which many of the groups that we are part of today operate like that. In terms of your introduction, Alexar, I'm afraid to say, although most of the tokenomics and the crazy gambling tokens that are out there are repeating the worst mistakes of the current system. One thing that having a token does for a group or an organization is it familiarizes all of its members with Web3 technology. So for a group of people, let's say farmers who are not very familiar with the technology, that want to govern a cooperative with a DAO, there will be a significant hurdle in getting people onboarded into the actual technology of Web3, whereas it'll be a lot easier for organizations that start with some sort of token where all the members are familiar with how that technology works and how to deal with these things responsibly, to then introduce some form of tokenized governance, voting, these types of things into it. I hope that sort of answered the question. I actually had a completely different framing in mind, but that works.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a complex matter and everyone looks at it from their own angle, definitely. And this is the beauty of this panel. I also wanted to ask every panelist to be real. And if someone says something you disagree, you can just bring it up. I know you personally, I know you're all practical people, so feel free to do so. So David, if I pass it on to you, especially if you can talk about a little bit about the legal aspect of DAOs and the like for the audience. I talk a little bit here before I pass it on to you. I want to generalize. If I put myself in the shoes of one of the members of audience, if they've heard about DAOs, especially recently, it would have been in the context of some NFT communities. There might be some like crazy talks and some like overexcitement, and it may be so far from the activities that members are part of, whether they are a cooperative already or they want to establish one. So it doesn't look like at all a match. can you tell us a little bit about the legal side of things and how DAOs can actually be compatible with cooperatives?
I think the first thing I'd say is that where I personally at least come from is about the problems, the difficulties, the elitism, the constraints that current legal practices make on organizations, particularly not-for-profit organizations that are trying to include richer human, environmental, cooperative values into their organizational structures. We're incredibly limited by the forms of legal structure that we have, and groups usually just sort of say, try and shortcut that process, sign any cheaply available document they can, put it on the shelf and never refer to it again. And this causes huge amounts of difficulties, arguments and problems, and opportunities for lack of transparency, corruption, and you know, later on down the road. The whole discipline of, if you like, law and how organizations work is kind of outsourced to this very elite and rich profession known as lawyers, and we feel like we have no control over that. So the ability to have an open source legal language, democratically understood by anyone on the planet, to be able to craft and express your own values, that's what law should be about. That's what we are able to build now. And while it's early stages, like the early stages of the internet, so quite a lot of the issues are technical, you know, with NFTs, understanding the blockchain, and even understanding the legal process itself, that's not how it will be or it should be. When this technology becomes ubiquitous and in the hands of, you know, kids and adults and organizations all around the world, it should be as easy to create the form of organization embedded with the values that you want as it is to set up a WordPress site or download or install an app, a mobile application. And so that's the problem when you're talking in this space and you're talking about blockchain and code and law. It puts a lot of people off, and it puts precisely the people we need on board to be able to co-create the kind of future that we're able and empowered to create now. And if we don't do it, I'm quite certain that the lawyers and the bankers will.
Yeah, definitely. What you mentioned is very powerful. Reminded me of a parallel world where using technology, there has been a particular group of people in the society that have been using technology to coordinate in a very, very large scale. And in fact, the fact that we're all joining from different parts of the world and using infinite infrastructure is mostly, for 99%, is built on free and open source software, which basically people who were in technology, they've been using technology itself to collaborate. So these things are possible, but like what you said, David, when it comes to non-technical matter in the actual society, we have proxies, whether the lawyers in the legal system, whether they're politicians in the political system, and that slows things really, really down. So changes would take sometimes generations and a lot of tears and sacrifications for any, I don't know, like a woman want to get voting right, there would be like a long history of sometimes generations of people who have to sacrifice their personal life for that. Whereas in the when those proxies are removed and there's ability to express yourself, things happen much, much faster. So I think the point that we are trying to make today is DAOs can potentially provide this layer where members of the same community can express themselves and collectively decide. So this is a question, I want to put this question to you, Akasha, given your exposure for many years to blockchain projects, not necessarily the biodiversity part now, I want you to change hats. Would you say which aspect of DAOs are the most powerful when it comes to applications that we're talking about. The tokens, the governance, talk a little bit about it from your experience, if you can.
All right, I could talk a long time. Hey, so we're talking a little bit about, we're talking about Web3 technology, and for people in the audience who maybe that's not a familiar term, where you can think of like Web 2 is basically platforms where we can create our own information, like Facebook, but it's not owned by us, it's owned by Facebook. And really there's no incentivization of us to use that platform, except that it's free. It's monetized because they take our data from us. Now, where Web3 evolves from there is that it basically becomes a massive commons, in that you have the elements of a resource, you have the elements of ownership, and you have the elements of ways of governing it. In that the Web3 platforms that are being built at the moment, they're decentralized. They're owned by the people who are participating in them, and they're incentivized to use them with the token structures like Anouk was mentioning. So in terms of then how, blockchain technology DAOs can then have application in terms of regenerative economies and facilitating, increases in land stewardship and environmental stewardship around the world, is that I've been listening to a lot of the talks over the last couple of days, and it's been really beautiful that this conference has been really led by the vision of, how do we return to more mutual economies, and how do we return the vast wealth of our world? Like literally it's $44 trillion every year that's being taken and extracted from the natural world. How do we give that back to the traditional owners that it's actually being extracted from, stolen from effectively? So that's been a really strong leading theme, and actually that's what has inspired, my life pretty much for the last 20 years, finding systems to solve that. Because I actually was doing a human rights law master's, and I quit because I was so frustrated with the top-down solutions that didn't seem to get us anywhere, and just suggested more laws. And I was like, these laws are coming from the people who are perpetrating the atrocities. So there's a mismatch here. So, how can they apply? Well, when we're talking about DAOs, like Anouk has mentioned, it's built with blockchain technology. So if blockchain isn't something that you're familiar with, and I'm guessing at times this video will be viewed by people who are just curious and want to learn, blockchain technology is basically about, if you can think of like a ledger, like on an Excel sheet, anyone can go in and just change it and modify it. But in blockchain, once the ledger is there, it's immutable. At the same time, with Excel, it's owned by Microsoft, unless you're using the Google version. With blockchain, it's across distributed networks. So basically no one really owns it except that the people who are participating in the system. It's not owned by a central person benefiting from it. So how it has application then to regenerative finance and environmental stewardship and all those beautiful ideas that we've been talking about during this conference is that we can now scale. We can scale in trustless ecosystems of relationship, whereas before, when we have our alternative economies, maybe time dollars, that sort of thing, our local communities, we've got to have the economy happening through people that we know. Whereas with blockchain, it's trustless. We don't have to know people anymore. It's that sort of aspect is taken out of our hands. So we can have like these polycentric layers of economy happening across, both place-based and then, more general areas, and then transnational. And that's the real beauty of, crypto and blockchain and DeFi, is that we can scale on levels bigger than corporations. We can scale on levels bigger than nation states. I mean, look at what's happening. Oh my God, with Shiba, I wrote an article about, 5 years ago, predicting this. It was in The Age or something, about how the young people of the world would define their own values and what was valuable and make money about that. And the rise of the meme coins, it's like it's happening. The young people are taking over and it's going to be global. So I hope that answers a little bit. But what I would say in particular is that the Indigenous people who've been leading the discussion today and yesterday, who have been talking about a return to mutual cooperative laws of obligation economies, it's like, but they don't know how to implement them in terms of getting the world to listen. Well, blockchain technology and DAOs enable you to do that, because you can now scale it beyond your local community. You can make it, you know, a national or, you know, transnational system.
Thank you so much. You mentioned I wanted to take it in a different direction, but I say this before I forget. I attended this hackathon called from this organization Yamal. I don't know if some members of the audience know this. This brilliant guy from initially from Brisbane. He was funded by a Victorian organization, and he started this in Melbourne. So Yamal is about Indigenous entrepreneurship. And when I went there and when I learned more about different ways of particularly aspects of Indigenous culture, I saw a great similarity with the architecture that I see is emerging in the blockchain world. So on that, Akasha, I think that would be, I think that we would see amazing applications and ideas emerge as Indigenous community are more familiar with the architecture of the blockchain. I think they may actually, they may be able to lead the architecture, because this is not about technology, this is more about designing it. And for the first time, I say this very briefly, technology, when we talk about information technology era, and information technology is normally been about what happens to the information. That's why it's always been really specialist. It's a thing that only a specialist could think about, whether you're doing computation or trying to extract some sort of insight from data, or whatever you do with data, whether it's sensor or whatever. But blockchain technology is not about the information itself, is about who interacts with the information. And that's something that we can directly input. It's not something we should wait for developers and technologies to do. In fact, if you ask me, they have no clue for the most part. I'm in discussion with a group of people for initiating a tech collective in Australia. And it's funny, a few people that I approached, they didn't know what a cooperative is. So, and these are basically advocates in their own field, which they're amazing people, but the understanding is not there. It's this is a technology that it's more about thinking, and the more someone has actually worked in the policy level or community or research, the better position they are to have an input. So without talking much, as I was listening to Akasha, I was thinking, if I was in the audience, I wanted to know a use case. So maybe Akasha, if you can talk a little bit about the project that you guys are doing and is actually using blockchain for the land. If you start from that, because then we can have a point of reference when we talk about other aspects.
Yeah, sure. So one of the hats I wear, it's a good hat actually, I like it, is marketing manager at Civic Ledger. And Civic Ledger is a blockchain technology company that has been in the space in Australia since about 2016. So, it's like prehistoric dinosaur. And what we've been doing is basically putting, natural capital markets on the blockchain. Now, we can have discussions about whether natural capital should be commoditized and, who are the rightful owners and all of that. And that is an important discussion, which, is valuable. But at the same time, in the world, we have got to realize that natural capital, natural resources are being moved around, and they're being moved around in a way that is opaque, siloed, not transparent. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what the prices are on things. We don't know who's buying it. And it's leading to the actual, tragedy of the commons, and that everything's being exploited and sucked out of nature without any idea about provenance or, the resource journeys. So what Civic Ledger's been trying to do is bring accountability to that and compliance, so that companies that are doing the right thing can actually assert that. And so what we did last year and year before was that we ran a pilot in Northern Australia it was the first in the world water markets on blockchain. And so there was about 1,000 people in that particular, so water markets are siloed, they're run by different operators, 15,000 different business rules, very complicated thing. But anyway, we were in one area in northern Queensland and put the local people on the blockchain there, and they're all farmers and they were interacting, you know, with Ethereum contracts, trading their water. And it worked. They liked it because it took away intermediaries, and it meant that their trading times went down from 90 days to 1 day. And the importance for that was that they could then be sure, like, yeah, I can plant that crop because I've got water. But, you know, water markets aren't the only place that we're operating in, and it's just environmental markets generally that we'll be branching out to. But how it becomes relevant to DAOs is in a number of aspects. And one, you know, we had some people talking today. I think it was Anne Paulina, beautiful, talking about how Indigenous people, their river systems are being commoditized and their water basins are being developed, and they don't have any say in it and they don't want it to happen. And there's no way for them to assert what their rights are because they aren't valued monetarily. So what we're very passionate about working with is Indigenous groups and First Nations people around Australia who are forming, you know, collectives, you know, like the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, who want to be able to self-assert their rights, and we'll be facilitating them to do it, you know, on the blockchain and say, yep, these are our rights, these are our cultural rights, these are our environmental rights, and they need to be respected. So they have autonomy there. And then the other aspect to keep in mind is that in the world now, there's literally trillions and trillions of dollars being invested, thrown at really, because they don't know what they're doing, into sustainable development technologies or just sustainable development generally. And there's about $300 billion every year being spent in the carbon market. In Australia, it's a tiny amount, tiny fraction, like only a couple billion. And one of the reasons for that is that the carbon market is really focused on, you know, it's companies, they just want to go and buy a big allotment of carbon. And so, you know, they're buying it from developing countries, Asia and so forth. But, you know, when we're talking about, you know, trillions and trillions of dollars every year in a new economy being born, which is an essential economy, frankly, and is that, you know, farmers, big or small, just landholders and traditional owners of the land shouldn't be locked out of it just because they're not big enough, you know, and the money shouldn't just be going to, you know, these big transnational corporations that have already bought up the land. So we need to find ways that, you know, people who just have a small farm or people who are working together, you know, as groups of traditional owners, you know, how do they interact with the market? And one way, of course, that we'll be facilitating is via DAOs, so that, you know, if you are a group of people who align in terms of your values and you want to offer the same kind of solutions and you want to govern yourself in a certain way, then you can, you know, come together and then operate with the wider market. Now, and those groups already exist, you know, they're sort of like, I think like the Australian Carbon Farmer Foundation, things like that. The trouble is, it's the same Web 2 problem of centralized, opaque, not secure, probably on an Excel sheet somewhere, and therefore not able to be, you know, transparent and accountable. So that's one, or a couple of use cases that are one, we're going live officially in the next few months with water markets on blockchain in real life in Queensland, and then hoping to work directly to bring in new areas and new people and new platforms for people to collaborate together for the benefit of the environment and for First Nations people.
Beautiful, thank you. So it looks like your project is totally leveraging on this aspect of blockchain that allows you to, without needing to know all those entities, basically without the need of a trust, cooperate effectively. What's happening? What's happened recently is that we can now go even further, and that cooperation can immediately be effective and basically have a legal framework. So the group right now, for example, Akasha, I imagine the blockchain is the technical layer that enables that, but it's still the legal entity is a traditional legal entity. It's funny, I think we call that traditional, but it means like every legal entity right now in this language is traditional. Now, I want David to tell us about these new legal entities that have been talked about for a long time, but they are so real, and how they relate to DAOs.
Hi there, let me see, yeah, it sounds on. So, I mean, the first thing to say, it might be obvious to some and then really controversial to others, is why would you need or want a legal entity if you can do all this amazing stuff just on the blockchain in code? And there are a couple of reasons for that, but the main and obvious one is when you want to interface with the kind of existing institutions, the kind of, you know, in blockchain space, you might call it the legacy world or the old world, right? For instance, we just applied to do a series of workshops with communities from around the world, small local arts and environmental communities with the British Council, and we had to apply for a grant for that application. The essence of the application was to work with DAOs, and we're going to run this organization as a DAO, but we also had to accept a grant from the British Council. And so what you can kind of do is, metaphorically speaking, just press a little toggle button and say, our DAO that we have, in other words, the way that we are organizing ourselves, let's check that box. And also let's wrap the whole thing with a kind of legal wrapper so that we can interface with the outside world. The way you do that is philosophically kind of conceptually weird and tricky. So the thing about code, you know, all these kind of noughts and ones, or the weird solidity language, or what you have it, that's not an agreement between people. If I use a piece of code to interface with you, Fiona, or with you, Anouk, it's meaningless. It has no meaning in law. And the essence of a contract between two people in law is that we have had, quote unquote, a meeting of the minds. That implies we both need to understand at a human, meaningful level what we've entered into in terms of an agreement. And using a whole string of noughts and ones or some obscure piece of code does not do that. So it has no legal provenance, no legal weight. And that's the foundation of nearly all contract law globally. The language that we've been working on at Lexon is a language which looks indistinguishable from English or a legal contract. In fact, you know, we've done experiments in Japanese, and I'm working now to do that language in Urdu and other languages. So you can imagine a process now in which the code that you write is literally as if we were sketching on a piece of paper and writing down the principles of our agreement. We understand what we're agreeing to, and then it compiles down to the code that helps us automate it in a trustworthy way. But at the same time, we've understood each other and what we're agreeing to. And that enables us to make our agreements legal. And jurisdictions and places around the world are getting the hang of this and passing legislation which allow companies to be run using blockchain code. So very recently, 2.5 months ago or so, Wyoming passed a piece of legislation which allows a DAO to run an LLC in the state of Wyoming. And in fact, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the first DAO to actually legally own land was created in Wyoming, where they bought 40 hectares or so of land, which has implications for how the project that we're working on with Lexon, which is called regovern.earth, how you can do environmental stewardship, and the projects that Akasha was talking about as well, in terms of how you would govern water rights and land rights, and involve not just ecological values, but the people who live on the land, indigenous groups and so forth, in the governance of that land. And when you can combine the kind of flexibility and the creativity that, you know, a games app developer brings to a project, to the way that you govern and steward something as complex as an ecosystem or a piece of land, then we're really in the right place with regard to the future of governance.
Beautiful. So we're living in a world where a team of technologists can make a software that reads Twitter and announces earthquakes anywhere in the world by just reading tweets, Twitter API. This is how connected we are. Even if we don't know each other, we kind of, someone can sense make out of our random residual information. We are living in a world where a group of people who are tweeting about something that becomes a trending hashtag, so they can express themselves, have a collective voice. If you've been following recently or not following and having heard about it, CryptoKitty has been something that before CryptoKitty, Ethereum was being considered by very serious players, but then someone said, okay, how about we sell pictures of kittens? And that stopped the whole Ethereum blockchain. The point I'm bringing up is that this is how powerful it is. This is how a group of people can decide and create value and actually exchange and express themselves. So with what David is saying, the same power that we're already using, whether we're aware of it or not, to express ourselves can be actually directly be bound to law, same way as whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, now Bitcoin is a digitally native currency that is just doing its own thing. It's just ignoring everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, like China, the US, like the US have had some very interesting development recently in terms of, we don't need to go far. Combank announced now you can actually, they can take custody of Bitcoin. You can actually hold your Bitcoin here. So when something is digitally native, it's powerful. And now we have that power by these digitally native organizations in terms of governance can actually interface law directly without, is that accurate what I said, David, so far? I want to make sure I use accurate language. Perfect. So now it's brilliant. It's time. It's interesting because things that we had planned to talk about, I hope we covered all. I will give time to each panelist to maybe if they had something in mind they want to bring up, but I have some good news for everyone who's in the room now and anyone who gets to watch the replay before December the 3rd. The conversation I started with Anouk and then Akasha took leadership in that. We are going to have a workshop on the DAOs for those groups that are considering it, or they just want to explore to see whether DAO is a good fit for their organization, or sometimes DAO might enable type of group that would not be possible in the current way that everything is set up, like what Akasha was talking about. So there's a workshop coming up. Akasha, if you can put a link for those who are right now. And if I may ask JP to kind of pass it on via email to the audience later, that would be good. So that's for free. And that's the first week of December. Now we've got, I believe, 2 minutes left. Anouk, any last 2-minute thing? It's better than like sometimes on TV, they give the poor guy like 10 seconds to wrap up. So 2 minutes.
Well, yeah, so I had a few things in mind I was going to talk about. What I will say is that, well, the DAO that can be controlled is not the true DAO. And there's sort of a bit of a spectrum, right? If you're thinking of organizing your organization this way, you can look at it as a spectrum going from, we have a private dictatorship, private limited liability company on the one hand, and a complete DAO on the other. And in the middle, you've got several steps of, we have some organization that has very specific parameters that people can, just tune and decide on this small piece or that small piece, but there's still a centralized group that's actually running operations, so to speak. And then you get to specific people can raise proposals to do more things, and then you can get to anyone can propose anything, and anyone else can be, independently through a network contacted to actually execute the functions of the organization. So there's a huge range, and anyone who's ever tried to set up some form of community organization or cooperative will know that to actually decide which rules groups of people organize and make decisions by is a very deep rabbit hole to go down. So there's a lot there that we will be looking at diving into in the upcoming workshop. And unfortunately, 50 minutes was never ever going to, get to the bottom of everything that Akasha knows or everything that David knows. There is so much here to uncover.
100%.
Yeah, this technology is exciting, but people come first, and communities come first.
I guess like the takeaway, if I can speak for the panelists, is that now what we're talking about with DAOs, and especially DAOs, as David covered, is a very real thing. And this is the time that we can practically dream. And if you see all the curves that they draw about, like different industry waves, it's all going up. So you can dream now, in 2 years later, everyone's be using that. So it's time. The time for the meeting is over, but with the permission that I got in the direct messaging from the organizers, we can stay on this room. And for those who would like to bring up their questions, I will definitely be here. Akasha said she has to leave at the midnight, so she has a few hours with us. David, would you be with us for a bit to answer questions? Perfect. Anouk? Yep. Yeah, thank you. And let's if someone wants to turn their mic on and just cut me, feel free, or put your question in the chat.
Yeah. Or you can raise your hand in the I guess it's participants area. No, reactions area. You can choose raise hand, and then we'll see you.
I saw you, Bronwyn.
Yeah, I raised a real hand, so far as anything's ever real on Zoom anymore. But thank you to all of you. I am very intrigued, and I'm trying to think how to put my question. So I feel like I've been reading a little around DAOs and blockchain somewhat for ages, but I've never been immersed in it in the way that you all clearly are. And you've identified lots of, and I'm also a legal academic of sorts. I'm definitely an academic. I'm not sure I'm very legal, but I resonate with what David said about law and everything. So it's been, my question is not so much about law, it's more about the tech side. So I've also done a lot on commons and cooperatives for a long time, and the coming together of these things. I mean, you've captured some of the tensions, but it just never ceases to amaze me. It's like, in some ways, there's so much potential, and in other ways, partly there's you haven't spoken much about the way that blockchain can and is being used hierarchically, in really nasty ways. And I'm sure we all know that, and we're just trying to work against it, especially in this conference. But even if you're all on board with the values, it's that sort of dissonance with the tech side. So one thing is just about, I guess, have you had much experience in getting people, and does this, particularly what David's talking about with these human readable laws, I mean, they're still laws, and laws even written by humans are not exactly congenial to deliberative dialogue with non-lawyers and so on. So if you had good experiences, so you sort of combine law and tech, and you've got two barriers to inclusion and diversity. And I mean, maybe that's too big a question. I think it's still an issue in this space. The other question is about, well, let me give an example with that might connect to what Akasha's example. So I don't know if any of you have come across Regen Network based in Northeast, and how they've created this foundation. So they've got the for-profit company and then the foundation. And then the foundation is not for profit, and it's explicitly aimed at trying to combine, real inclusive dialogue with the ability to give tokens to people who might not be able to otherwise afford them, including farmers and scientists and Indigenous people. And I mean, I'm not deeply involved in that, but I joined the Discord channel, and I find the same thing. It's really, I tried to it's really hard to participate, even for me, who I feel like is relatively on board with this. If I was a busy farmer, I mean, Akasha's story sounded great. It sounded like the farmers just jumped on the blockchain and went, yay, no departmental or corporate intermediaries. And maybe that's all I need to know. It's possible, but it's hard. And the other tech question is about IP, which is whether you can build these platforms, these really DAO-like platforms, without any reliance on, I keep coming across these conversations about people saying we need alternatives to Twitter and Google and Amazon, and they're all building them. But that, again, is another thick layer of technical barriers. And can you build these DAO-like, really inclusive platforms using the IP of all these sorts of dominant tech people and not get stuck down the line? But thank you.
Yeah, good. We've got Anouk. May I, Anouk, just drop in one thing and then pass it on to you? And then we've got David as well. So on the last thing you mentioned, Bronwyn, about social media. So we already have purely peer-to-peer social media software. One of them is actually coming out of New Zealand. It's called a Scuttlebutt. I'll put a link later. And so a blockchain movement has basically started, inspired a lot of people to bring those peer-to-peer ideas and implement the technology. So a lot of those things are possible. In fact, they exist right now. So passing on to Anouk.
Okay, that was a big, complicated question. Lots of issues you touched on. What I thought Alexar would go straight to is, in terms of the IP side of things, everything that's on the blockchain is essentially open source. So you can copy all those contracts, and everybody is building little pieces that are then reused by everybody else. That's why the space is moving as fast as it is. But of course, not everybody can read those things. So you do have a technocratic elite, if you will, that actually can do that sort of stuff. And I don't see an easy way to get around that. And the last thing, in terms of the people standing up different social media type things, on a second to last thing. Unfortunately, we've got massive network effects. It's no point getting on a new platform if 2 billion people are on Facebook and no one is on Decentralized, right? Which is why it's difficult to start something new that doesn't just do a thing that's already being done worse than it's already being done in order to beat it at its own game. However, it is possible to build alternatives. It is possible to get people on alternatives. And when it comes to things like the land stewardship, one thing that has been shown blockchains are good at doing is raising funding. Although, of course, a lot of the regulations are stepping in there to make sure that doesn't happen too freely and too easily. But it is a way to get a lot of people to contribute time, energy, and resources to a collective effort. David?
Just to refer to, I think, the two core questions that were raised. One is like how you would engage, let's say, a group of farmers. How do you narrow this gap between the technology and the kind of on the ground usage? And the second question was on IP and how that might work. So on the first one, I think if you kind of zoom back, you should imagine doing something like that, a bit like introducing people to the internet in the early 1990s. I mean, the result, if you look at what most DAOs are online and you try and enter into the discussions, it's a very elite, strange group. The language is unfamiliar and all this kind of things. And the end result, it looks horrible. So, but obviously things can move very, very fast in this space. And that's what we're kind of talking about here. And I think the core of it, and certainly that's the approach we take with Lexon, is how you do a workshop. So how do you involve the community in a discussion, and how do you make that playful and imaginative and discuss the sorts of governance you want, and then how you take that to something that can be turned into smart contracts in a DAO. So at Lexon, just to give you an example of the sort of way you can go from workshop to DAO, the actual nature of the code, as I said, is in English. So if I just read out here what the code that runs compiles to the blockchain for, let's say, an escrow contract reads like, so imagine it's in JavaScript or in Solidity or what have you, and I was to read out the code, you'd go, what on earth is that? But the code here, I can screen share, but and we can do it live in the workshop with people. The code reads like this: the arbiter may pay from escrow the fee to themselves, and afterwards pay the remainder of the escrow to the payee. Okay, but that sounds a little bit legalese, but it is comprehensible if you really talk through it, and that compiles straight down to Solidity, and you can use in your DAO. It is also something that if you print it out and hand it around in the workshop, is a legal contract that you would be entering into, and is something you can discuss the principles. So if you start, and we also, I have a theatre and arts background, so I've been working with participatory formats and how you do playful explorations of conflict situations and resolutions and arbitrations. You can start a workshop process where you imagine the sorts of governance you want, and then you write down the principles in kind of like shorthand English, or whichever is your native language, and that can become the specification with which you write the actual code or legal governance of your organization. And those are the sorts of workshops we can do now. And the beauty of doing it that way as well is that you future-proof your governance, because things in technological space are moving so quickly. New languages, blockchain languages, and chains are coming, raining down from the sky. Because if you write down your principles and the results of your workshops with your community in a language like Lexon or in English, and by the way, Lexon is an open source language, it's open to the whole world. It's not, I'm not pitching a company thing, I'm pitching the principles of being able to write code this way. If you do it that way, you can compile it down to the software. It's using compiler technology, whatever that means, but it basically takes the text and outputs the code at the end of the process. And that means as new technology or the language, the blockchain language gets updated, the same principles that you agreed to with your community will export to an update version of the code. So your work that you put in isn't out of date like a year later, because governance is slow, is complicated, and you don't want to be on this kind of treadmill dependent on lawyers and an elite group of coders just because you want to update some way that you do something in your organization. You want to keep it as a living document that is part of the way you work.
Thank you so much.
On the IP bit, just very briefly, because in the summer, the UN Stockholm Plus 50 conference, we're going to be launching, and I'm hoping this follows on with a series of workshops, a governance platform or an open incubator for creating innovations in governance. the platform that's a blockchain powered platform that we'll be launching to do that innovation and to do these workshops and to do these experiments has built-in IP protection. So what you can do, and by the way, a lot of people feel strange, particularly when they come from an open source or an open knowledge kind of backgrounds. When you talk about IP, that's the thing that, you know, the evil people do. But IP is basically the sort of the core of protecting something. And you can use it to protect a commons or a knowledge commons or a digital commons. You can use it to prevent selling of this to Google or not to name any particular entity, but, you know, to some organization, commercial organization whose values don't align with yours. So it also allows you as just a group of people innovating in space. And by the way, IP stealing people's ideas isn't only restricted to big bad private entities. I know lots of examples of young people with a great idea for an environmental conference or what have you, who approach a not-for-profit, and the person at the not-for-profit takes it for their own career advancement and gives no credit to the people working on that idea. So just in a human sense, also, if you just want to protect an idea before you release it into the outside world, it's like stewarding a young baby. You have to have those discussions until it's strong enough to kind of survive. So IP protection is essential to good human stewardship of something you care about. And the platform that we're launching regovern.earth on has built-in IP protection so that you can do things like defensive patenting, or you can seek new forms of sustainable business models around the ideas that you might be investing in. It might be a new form of wind turbine, it might be a new form of you know, battery, or it might be just a new game that you want to release which has an environmental message inside it. And in all those instances you need to do IP protection, and that is entirely possible. And in fact, precisely because you put it on something like a software or a blockchain enabled software tool, it makes that much more accessible to, you know, a group of kids at school with a bright new idea. You know, and that's precisely the benefit of democratizing these things that historically, you know, the big bad companies were the only people with access to.
Fantastic. Thank you. It really brought it alive.
So Alexar, I think we have time for one more question and then we really should wrap.
Okay. Yeah, is there any, I think there has been conversations in the chat. I was typing a long message. I thought, oh, I may as well just say it. I just wanted to remind you, you have, maybe you have been that person who collects signatures. I have contributed to that. I have seen people, it takes a lot of effort. Now just think about that endeavor, like collecting signatures to take it somewhere, and at the end of the day, it's not necessarily binding, right? Now all that effort, instead of that, can go into something that a collective body can express itself, and that expression would immediately take place in a way that it can interface the external world. So it's and I think that will remove a lot of frustrations. It will encourage a lot of participation, and maybe because once there are ways for ideas and thoughts to flow, I think everything will become more peaceful and in harmony. At least we can just push our ideas forward instead of either tuning out and saying, oh, the whole thing is not working, I don't care, or being frustrated and angry all the time. So we didn't take questions from the audience in real life. I don't know, JP, how are we going to go about it? But maybe we leave everything. Maybe we leave those questions for the workshop.
Fiona's had her hands up for a little while.
Oh yeah,
now.
I missed that.
It would be unfair to not address that.
Did not include her. Yes, we have one more. Go ahead.
Thank you, Anouk. I'm really grateful. I'm very impressed by the knowledge in the space, and I can see tremendous potential for this in helping us to coordinate ourselves better for our shared values. And I'm almost completely ignorant in this space. So the question I have is actually more a general blockchain related one. And I'm asking you as people who are values aligned and knowledgeable about this stuff. My very poor understanding is that once something's in the blockchain, it's kind of there forever. And that's part of the beauty of it, it's there. And I'm just sitting with the understanding that this all helps us to coordinate so we can be of benefit in the bigger physical world. And what we're doing actually also will have a direct physical implication. There are physical pieces of equipment that are required to store all this information. And the more information that's stored, the more physical equipment and the more electricity. So I can't find myself thinking about something like a tree where, you know, it's seeded, it grows, it provides various forms of sustenance to its environment. And when its time is done, it breaks down into smaller pieces and it's reused by its environment. I'm wondering what's the equivalent process for blockchain and its infrastructure?
Go, David.
Well, it's a brilliant question and super, super important and not often like addressed by people in blockchain space. And that's because of the sort of personality and mind that's attracted to blockchain. They want it to be robust. They want it to be unhackable. They want it to be immutable. They kind of don't want it to be touched by the messy processes of human minds or organic matter, if you like, right? But that causes a huge problem for any form of lifelike organization or lifelike governance, where you're constantly having to adapt to changes in the outside world. You constantly haven't thought of consequences of what you've done and passed in your constitution or your carbon offsetting algorithm or whatever it is, like, you know, 3 years ago, and it's beginning to have terrible effects that you didn't anticipate, right? So it's essential that anything we do in this space is firstly really carefully tested and workshopped and thought through. It's, you know, there is obviously a kind of youthful energy and just get this stuff out and we'll change the world and all of that. But anytime we've had a revolution or a dramatic change in governance, in law, in democracy, in power, it hasn't always ended well, right? So we have to really be very careful and thoughtful about how we do this, particularly if we're bringing in environment and other things. You know, we have the potential to really address things like climate change and like, you know, carbon gas emissions and proper stewardship of land, but we also have the potential to really do damaging stuff if we're not careful, right? And centralize things and give it over to Facebook or whatever it is that we do wrong without really having thought through things, or just bad actors. It doesn't have to be big companies. It can be hackers and you know, malevolent groups, basically. So it's very important to use things thoughtfully, and the immutability and the difficulty of changing something like a ledger is a very powerful tool, but you don't necessarily want to be writing your childhood party photograph memories to that store. You want to put that on something that's more throwaway and more ephemeral, right? And just because it's very useful to have that immutability for things like transparency, if you want to look back over 15 years, or for scientific publishing, or for some things like that are important legally, like currency or accountability reasons, you want to be careful what you put on it. And so we need to combine the organic nature of evolving agreements with the blockchain. And when you do something in software, when you do something with technology, you have that flexibility. You just, at the moment, that's kind of not a mainstream part of the discourse. It is a sort of like more of a bleeding edge thing. You know, so if you like, the blockchain universe has gone towards, because of where it was born, to this very rigid, immutable space that burns a lot of electricity in order to create a truly robust, unhackable, blah, blah. But it doesn't have to be like that. We have the ability to use those ingredients. I see it a bit like steel or, you know, something in our buildings, but we don't have to make the whole building out of steel. We can use wood as well.
Yeah, there are trade-offs in security, and robustness, and resilience, and storage and electricity use, that and speed, throughput, that blockchains or DLTs, distributed ledger technologies, can be designed with. So there are other types of technologies out there that are a lot more efficient. Some actually include what they call pruning of stuff that's no longer relevant, and then some you're much more flexible into what rules you do. But the biggest platforms at the moment all started from the place where Bitcoin started, which is no matter how much money or power a government has, they will not get their hands on this to break it. And that's a very different goal from, you know, let's share some vegetables together and let's preserve the, you know, the Amazon rainforest as a commons. You're on mute.
I'll just add as well that as a closing thought, we're really only just into the, I mean, it feels like, you know, blockchain's new, but hell, computers are new as well. And we've got a long way to go, I think, in the evolution of computer technology. And I think I saw a news article that, I think it was China, they've released information that they've got a computer there that's a million, like a quantum computer that's 1 million times faster than any of the other quantum computers available at the moment, like a ridiculous level faster. So these are questions that there will be people working on, and they're big questions, because at the moment, our whole infrastructure, like the whole banking system, all of our current governance and corporations and internet, it's all consuming electricity and resources as it is at the moment, and very inefficiently at that. So I think there's going to be a number of horizontal and vertical ways that there are greater efficiencies put into the system, because ultimately the way that we're existing, it can't continue, because of the way that we're existing, just to the way that our economies are set up, our structures are set up, they're extractive, and that can't work. So we have to find models that support a mutualistic, you know, a relationship-based system to the world. And so yes, that will probably require more computing power, just like we have big brains as primates, because we're so social, and, you know, so that sociality is relationship building. So yeah, it's going to take energy, it's going to take resources, but I think we're only just at the beginning of that evolution.
Can I just make one comment just on that, which is that my understanding with technology is that what we've discovered is the more efficient you make it, the more people will use it. So it doesn't necessarily keep things under control.
There's a lot of, we humans are funny things. There's a lot of moving things, Fiona. So right now, I was just typing, as we just said, the mining rigs and Bitcoin is actually advancing renewables technology. I can tell you that. I'm an electrical engineer. Also, there's a lot of energy that's being wasted. Our grid system is very inefficient. A lot of energy that is going into Bitcoin right now. This is something it's not really discussed. It's an energy that's going to be wasted anyways. But also technology is changing. Like David, before passing it on to you, in a few years' time, we'll see local peer-to-peer software that will radically improve the energy consumption. We just need to be on the discussion and add input and shape what's coming, I think, because, and then, yeah, and then the more we do this, the better the direction is going to be. David, passing to you.
I'm sorry I stuck my hand up so much, because I'm super interested and passionate about the point that Fiona brought up. which is it is so true that, I mean, there is basically an infinite demand for power and electricity on the planet and for people. And the question is, how can we deal with that in the situation where we do have global constraints on what we can use in a sustainable way? And the worst possible situation is if the person driving the bus or the governance and stewardship of mankind is like a over testosterone teenager with very little self-control. What that kind of metaphor is saying is that it's really, really important to invest in governance in order to get that sort of informed, intelligent, mature, knowledgeable self-control. And any advanced biological organisms, my background's biomedical, we invest over 25, nearly 30% of our glucose intake just to keep our brains running, right? If the planet, if Gaia wishes to steward the processes, the ecosystem, intelligently and coherently and empathetically and emotionally moving forwards, it's going to need to be spending that kind of amount of its total resources in restraining itself, in governing itself, right? So we don't want to decrease the amount of energy that we spend on our decision making, on the way that the finance works, the accountancy works, the way that politics works and what have you. We want to get better at it, precisely so we can govern it and restrain it according to environmental values.
That is a brilliant way to complete us, David. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone, Alexar for able hosting, Anouk, Akasha, and David. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for staying late. And we're really looking forward to the workshops. So I'm going to save the chat. And if you want to, anybody else, go to the 3 dots in the lower right, click Save Chat. You'll have the links right on your computer. Again, thank you, everyone. We shall see you tomorrow for day 2 of NENA. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Oh, bye-bye.
Thanks. Great.
Happy Friday evening.
Yes.
Yeah.